we are going to hear a recap of the legislative session. But before we jump into that, a couple of quick housekeeping items that I think most people know, but I will review. You're probably all Zoom experts, but please realize that everyone in our audience will be automatically muted. We will post resources into the chat feature. We'd love for you to participate by posting your questions in the chat as well, and we'll do our best to get to as many of those as we can. And if you have any tech issues, you can let the host, and that's Stephanie, not me, but you should be able to see her name, know in the chat by chatting with her directly. And so, again, today we're going to talk about how the legislative session shook out, and I'm really excited to have our panel. And I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. And just so you know, we have, aside from myself, Stan, Antonio, Tara, and Jan. So Stan, you're up. Can you give us just a quick introduction of yourself?
Sure. I want to thank the Quality State Policy Center for putting this on. My union's been a member for quite a while. We were formerly the United Transportation Union. Now we're the International Association of Sheet Metal Air Rail Transportation Workers. I'm the Wyoming State Legislative Director for that union. Formerly, well, I'm still a Union Pacific employee, have been for 30 plus years. And I was formerly a state legislator for 14 years. I live in Green River and glad to be here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Antonio, you're next.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Antonio Serrano. I'm the advocacy manager for the ACLU of Wyoming. At the ACLU Wyoming, we work on everything from criminal justice reform to immigrant rights, indigenous rights, you name it, we're fighting for it here in Wyoming because we definitely need to do it. So yeah, that's who I am.
Thank you. Okay, Tara, how about you?
Thanks, Steph. My name is Tara Muir. I'm the Public Policy Director and Lobbyist for the Wyoming Coalition Against Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault. While our mission is to end domestic violence and sexual assault, we know that's really bound up with ending all oppression and ending all abuses of power. So our agenda begins to get bigger and bigger. But I'm looking forward to the discussion today.
Thank you. And Jan?
Thanks, Steph. Good evening. I'm Jan Cartwright. I'm the Executive Director of the Wyoming Primary Care Association. And we are the representatives of the community health centers in Wyoming who provide health care to people who would otherwise not have it. So in other words, no one can be turned away from a health center in Wyoming. They receive federal funding to make sure that we serve everyone. So Medicaid expansion is my issue, and it's a natural for the health centers simply because it would be wonderful to continue to provide services to people at an even higher level once they've presented with healthcare issues or just presented for a regular checkup. And so the services at health centers are meant to provide wraparound care. We are very concerned about people being homed. We're concerned about people being safe in their homes. And so we try to do as much as we possibly can to be holistic about those folks who come to us for care. So thank you so much. This is a great panel to join, and I appreciate the opportunity tonight.
All right. Well, thank you, all of you. For our audience, I just want to let you know that this program is designed to help people across Wyoming engage in our government and keep up with the important issues and debates going on in Wyoming. And when we work together, we can ensure transparent government, fair elections, and thriving communities, which is exactly what we're going to be covering tonight. And so we're going to cover the topics that you've heard about, but I'll just outline them again. I'm going to be covering conservation topics. Stan will be covering labor, Antonio, the death penalty, Tara, social justice topics, and Jan, Medicaid expansion, all issues that took place during our legislative session. Each panelist will only get 3 minutes. This is a real test to summarize what your high and lows are of the session or any special takeaways that you want to share with the audience tonight. And then we'll get into some fun questions and dialogue. So I am actually first up on conservation. Starting on the limited positive side, I want to highlight in conservation HB 122 that passed, which creates a reliable funding source for public hunting and fishing access to currently blocked or landlocked public lands. This bill generates funds to purchase access easements across private lands and thus addresses a huge need in our state that 3 million acres of public lands are not accessible for recreation. So this was a really important and sadly the only truly proactive positive bill for conservation this session. And we all owe thanks to Representative Western, who is the lead sponsor. Second, I want to give a shout out to our LSO, Legislative Service Office, that put on a fantastic public user-friendly session, including great floor video feeds, and most importantly, and a first for Cheyenne during the session, live video committee meetings with the opportunity for public testimony. This was a real win-win for everyone. On the not so positive side, there was a lot of defense work to defeat bad bills or actions for conservation. We successfully defended an attempt to raid money from the Wildlife and Natural Resources Trust account, which funds important habitat and restoration projects around the state. Our biggest fight was defending our state's rooftop solar law, which has worked so well for some 20 years, enabling homeowners and small businesses to save money on their electricity bills, support clean energy, become more self-reliant, and also it supports lots of jobs around the state. We were ultimately successful in defeating this bill, but not without pulling out all the stops with citizen engagement. And so I really want to thank all the public here tonight who helped. People showed up to testify remotely by the dozens, and hundreds of emails were generated. Legislators compared our broad coalition of work on this to the power of the gun lobby, which is an interesting comparison, but we are glad to accept praise for that citizen power. So thank you, all of you. The overwhelming narrative of the session in conservation, however, was mostly about coal, propping up inefficient or increasingly uneconomical and certainly not carbon neutral coal-fired power plants. This was tried through all kinds of regulatory, legal, and fiscal strategies, and was also actively aimed against the use of renewable energy, wind and solar, in spite of its cheaper price in many cases. Of the 10 or so bills we counted in this category, only a few and the least damaging passed, but the jury is still out on whether Wyoming people will pay higher electricity prices for this regulatory subsidizing of coal, and it may also limit our state's ability to transition to clean energy. Another fallout of this focus was that the state failed to look proactively at energy transition needs, diversifying our economy, and consider help for workers and communities that may be abandoned as the rest of the nation transitions to clean energy. So that wraps up my hopefully 3 minutes. And Stan, I wonder if you're okay going next.
You bet. Thanks, Steph. I appreciate it. I appreciate everybody on the panel and all the people out in the audience listening. There really weren't a lot of labor bills, and I was kind of disengaged there for a little while until a railroad bill really piqued my interest. So I want to talk about Senate File 16, which was the new metering bill, which was a bad bill for sure. And it affected labor because there's a lot of IBEW, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, who are doing this work right now. So that would have led to an uncertain market, or, you know, should we put up solar or electric generation things or not? So I'm glad that bill went away. And that was a committee bill. That was a joint corporations committee bill. Another one on my radar, which was a horrible bill, in my humble opinion, Senate File 19, Public Health Emergencies Immunity Amendments. And the only good thing about that bill, and it passed, was the Representative Mike Ian amendment that extended workers' comp benefits for COVID-19 until March 31st, 2022. So, in a right to work state, very red state, you take your little victories where you can get them. A bill that didn't even get considered, I don't believe, I think it may have died in committee, was House Bill 196, Workplace Transparency Act, would prohibit employers. So if you're an employee and you sign a waiver, you can't tell your fellow employees what you make. And to me, that's very discriminative towards women, especially because men make more money than women, the same kind of jobs. But some employers say, you need to sign this so you can't say what you make and tell your fellow employees. And Kathy Conley ran that bill. And I believe there was a mirror bill in the Senate, was run by Representative Salazar, I believe. And the one that really piqued my interest was House Bill 249. So was a railroad safety 2-person crew bill. And we had great support in the House, 36 votes. And I thought we would have had 37, but one was excused. But I went and I talked to Dan Dockstetter and Ogden Driscoll. I said, please assign that to a committee, because last year it didn't even get assigned to a committee. And they stood up to their word and they assigned it to committee, but it died in committee on a 3-2 vote, and several disappointing votes in there to me. But when you hop on a plane, you expect there's going to be 2 pilots on there. I hope there is. You look at the problems they had with the 737 Maxes crashing and killing. Technology has replaced railroaders, but when you have an emergency on a railroad train, the first person that could possibly get there and help out first responders is the conductor. The engineer really can't leave the train. So the people who spoke out and testified against that just really hit me wrong. The Wyoming Business Alliance spoke against it. The Trona industry, of course, the Union Pacific and the Burlington Northern Santa Fe spoke against it. But this was about public safety, and it's really about jobs too. Do we want one person on a train rolling through your community, hauling who knows what, chlorine gas and hydrous ammonia? And had a great support from ESPC members who testified on it, and great support in the Senate committee. I know Representative Pat Sweeney came down and spoke, and Representative Romero Martinez spoke. He came from a railroad family. He knows how the railroads work. So it's a tough nut to crack here in a red state and a right to work state, but workers repeatedly get the short end of the stick here in Wyoming, period. And thank you for my 3 minutes.
Thank you, Stan. That was great. Appreciate it. And all your personal work as well, coming down there at the session. Antonio, I think you're next.
Right on. Thank you. Thank you. So you mentioned you wanted us to talk a little bit about our highs and lows of the legislature. So like Steph said, it was a big defense year for social justice, for anyone that cares about people of color, for reproductive rights, for everything. I mean, it was a big defense year. We saw horrible bills, like a lot of anti-abortion bills that have big impacts on reproductive rights. We saw anti-sanctuary bill again, which keeps coming back every year. And a voter ID bill that has a big impact on voting rights in Wyoming. So I guess you know, with all that defense you have to play, it's hard to see a high in there, you know what I mean? But the high was the beginning of the legislature when we thought this was the year we were gonna repeal the death penalty. We were sure of it almost, you know. And I really think it was a COVID that was a big reason that made that challenging. You know, you can't organize in the community, you can't be out having events, tabling events when there's a pandemic happening. You know what I mean? So that was a huge challenge for this work. But I mean, we made some momentum. We still made some ripples. We got awareness going out there. We got people paying attention to it. And the fight's definitely not over. So that was our high, is when we thought we were going to win, and I guess the low is when we didn't, when we lost. And I think it was 11-19 vote. So that was our low. But like I said, I mean, there's a lot of people who see how horrible the death penalty is. They see they're opposed to it for the same reason the ACLU is. You know, it denies equal protection to people. It's cruel. It's unusual punishment. And it removes guarantees of due process of law. And then it's racist, plain and simple. It's racist. I mean, we've seen here in Wyoming where Latinos and indigenous people are impacted more by the death penalty than anybody else. And that's something we see across the nation. It's plain and simple racist, and we need to do away with it. It's an unnecessary expense on our state. A lot of times people think that money is going to, you know, if we don't send someone to death, that money is go back into the budget, but it never makes it back, because every year there's at least one person, you know, that has to face a death penalty trial, and then that money ends up just going to the case. So it never goes back to the budget. It's a huge waste. So yeah, I mean, we're gonna keep fighting. The ACLU and a lot of the allies, a lot of people who've been working on this are gonna keep fighting, and have been fighting for years, and we're gonna get rid of it. We will. So yeah, that's me. I've kept it nice and short.
Thank you, Antonio. And I have to tell you, I am so impressed with the really diverse coalition that ACLU has built around this issue. It's inspiring. Really excellent work. Thanks. Okay, I think Tara, you are next on the list. So go for it.
All right, thanks, Steph. We always have a number of bills that are trying to address crimes against mostly women, but certainly it goes against all people, regardless of gender identity, sexual orientation, race, class, gender. And we're working in our movement to really focus in on what will help everyone. And we kind of talk about that as the last girl concept. When there are people in our state that don't even know how to reach out for help, who may be a victim of sexual assault or domestic violence, they don't even know about a crisis network or a network of shelters. So we can create all the crimes we want and serious penalties. And, you know, there's some evidence that has helped stem the tide of violence against people who may not be following the perfect gender roles that traditional teachings may tell us what women or men or anyone in between should figure out. So this year, there were a couple of bills that did pass that are okay, like from the House side, House Bill 46 was, I don't know, maybe it should be a crime not to have sex with an animal. Kind of basic. But that finally passed, thanks to Representative Stith. He also brought House Bill 85, which was, and we'll write this down because it's an obnoxious name of a bill, unlawful dissemination of an intimate image, which people like to shorten to call revenge porn, which if you really listen to the social scientists, most folks who are more than happy to share their, let's be clear, I hope we're PG-13, nude photos of their girlfriends, boyfriends, whoever, usually aren't doing it for revenge. They're doing it for status. They're doing it to show off. But that now is a crime. We made it a crime when young people did it so that the penalties were very low and young people could learn the error of their ways. So these two House bills did pass all the way through the Senate. The Senate loves to slap on really steep felony punishment though. And so those got tacked on. We weren't happy about. We'd rather have the crime be a little easier to prove so people can get the help they need. A couple of other crimes that came from the Senate side were voyeurism. We already have a voyeurism statute. You know, you shouldn't be tiptoeing around and filming people's private parts without their consent. Although we don't even have the word consent in Wyoming statutes. But that bill passed. There were attempts to really weaken it because the definition needed some upgrading, but Senate File 87 passed. And that really updates the definitions for current, all the social media and devices that are used to film people and capture images. So all these bills started to get confusing because they were sort of related. The last bill I'll talk about was the heartbreaker, was our Senate File 75, which is a policy wonks nightmare, because it was really just to make our state law very clear that any order, when you go to get a protection order, is just as equal and powerful as any other order of the court. It's complicated, but a couple of different judges in the state were confused about that. And you kind of learn that in first year law school. So we were trying to just bring two sentences that would say, if the parties stipulate to one of these protection orders, knowingly, voluntarily, understanding, I should leave that person alone. I don't have to admit to any crime. I don't have to confess anything, but I agree to leave them alone. That's a stipulated order. Should have the full force and effect as any other court order. That bill didn't pass. It flew through the Senate side, but the House side got really hung up on some technicalities that are hard to describe in a supposedly 3 minutes, and I've probably gone over. So that was a heartbreak. And I'm certainly able to send out some links if you want to just follow what we're following. It seems separate, but so intersectional with the other things that are happening. So that's my list for now.
Thank you, Tara, and thank you for yours and other coalition members' support on these really important issues that you can see how they get overlooked and they're so important. Next, we're going to move on to Medicaid expansion, and Jan, welcome for covering that.
Thank you so much, Steph. In this session, this was really a tale of two bills. So we had the luxury of having a bill in each house. We had House Bill 162, which was a little bit technical in terms of the goals that it had. We also had Senate File 154, which was really much more straightforward in terms of just giving the governor permission to work with the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid to talk about how Medicaid could be expanded in Wyoming. And I meant to set my timer, I'm sorry. Okay. The bills were very interesting in the end. Without a lot of detail here, the House bill was amended to look like the Senate file after the Senate file had died. And so I want to talk a little bit about the highs and lows as other folks have. I think that one of the highs was Senator McEwen's vote in Senate Labor when he voted aye for Senate File 154, allowing it to come out of the Senate Labor Committee and be then put on general file in the Senate. That was a huge victory. That was a difficult committee. We'd known for a long time it was a committee that was probably not going to vote that way. I have to give a shout out to the grassroots. There was some folks from Gillette from his district who really held his feet to the fire. And at the end of that morning, I think we all probably fell out of our chairs when he voted aye. And so unfortunately, that didn't mean that the bill was going to move forward. It died on general file. In the meantime, House Bill 162 was moving on the other side. And when we got to committee for that one, it was a little, so some of the political wrangling was that even some of the sponsors, including the House Committee Chair, agreed that Senate File 154 was the better bill. And so she was kind of holding back the House bill to see what would happen with the Senate file. Well, unfortunately, then she had to start moving that bill. And so we were successful in the, can't remember when it was amended, but it was amended to look like the Senate file. And we were really pleased by that. Again, without all the technicalities, House Bill 162 got through the House. This is the furthest that we've gotten with Medicaid expansion. This was a huge victory. And I have to lay it at the feet of this coalition who have done such a great job of building grassroots. I know later in the conversation, we're going to talk about the connectedness about all of this, but grassroots really make a difference. And so we're really proud of that. Another high was seeing 3 legislators, including former Speaker Harshman, sitting in front of Senate Labor when the House bill then crossed over and was being heard in Senate Labor. And so you saw Chairman Harshman from Revenue, Representative Sweeney, and Senator Rothfuss all sitting in front of the Senate Labor Committee talking about this bill. So for me, that was real high. I felt like that was historical. My last high was that the Senate Labor Chairman allowed the conversation to go an hour longer. So we had started at 7 because there were 2 big bills on the agenda. The previous bill took an hour, and then at 8 o'clock we started talking about Medicaid expansion. I think the House and Senate gavelled in at 10 and we still kept going. So I was really pleased for that. So those were my highs. So my low is going back to Senator McEwen, who then, after he voted aye for the Senate file, he never made a comment, but people around him said that he was a new freshman legislator and he really didn't know what he was voting for, which was very sad. But then when it came to the next bill, which was really starting to have some traction, he was more than happy to say that he totally understood that bill. He disagreed with everything we said and he voted no. And that was the end of that. So it was quite a rewarding process. Just every year that I get to work with the amazing coalition members that come together to work on this is amazing. But this year kind of got some energy going. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jan, for your good work and for that diverse coalition's work. It did get very close. So we were all watching and pulling for you. So we have wrapped up our presentations. And now is the time where the first thing I'm going to do is ask any of the panelists if you have any questions for each other on what you've heard from the various presentations. And I would just say, turn on your mic and maybe go for it.
I'm going to ask a rhetorical question, but I think it's important to really put forward. I know it might come up later, but it's a later question, and I don't know if I'll have time for it. What do all of these issues have in common that Equality State Policy Center puts their emphasis on? And so I would ask my fellow panelists that.
Who wants to go?
I'm happy to jump in on that one. I love complexity because it's the only way that we're really going to end the kind of violence that runs through families and our states. But I think what Equality State Policy Center really does well is try and draw these intersections. And there's a whole, while we have this social justice pillar, we also have this piece that talks about healthy communities, and absolutely Medicaid expansion would lead to healthy communities. All the bills we work on, well, right now they're very criminal justice oriented, which is heartbreaking at times. The intersection there is, hey, if we wanted a healthy community and healthy people, we would invest some time in healthy education for children, healthy sexuality education, which, you know, lots of people cover their ears, age appropriate, but where are your healthy boundaries, and how do you have healthy relationships rather than unhealthy ones that lead to these crimes and traumas that just keep perpetuating themselves. And it's not just mental health or substance abuse that's going to help with people recovering from those things, whether you're a perpetrator or a victim of it. It's why are you using violence to do anything? And I think ESPC's ability to talk about healthy communities, we wouldn't have that kind of violence. And working on those issues is super important. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Tara. Someone else?
One thing I'll add to is one thing I see that we have in common is we're all fighting for a better Wyoming in our own individual battles. And in Wyoming, and I've said this a lot of times, it's not an uphill battle. We're climbing cliffs and they're icy, like for real. So I think one thing I see is that there are people in Wyoming who want to change. There are people in Wyoming who are oppressed, who are being ignored, who are being overlooked. And we're kind of the spearheads of those people, of those movements, of those campaigns, those groups, but there's a lot of work going on, and there's a lot of people who need support here in Wyoming. We need backup. We need people to show up, people to call lawmakers, people to get involved. Is I think one thing that's we all agree on is we need more people to be involved.
For it.
Yeah, I think it boils down to the everyday common folks of Wyoming and their wants and their needs. The Quality State Policy Center lets people participate, learn how to participate through their citizen legislators or citizen lobbyists. And I think that's what really it boils down to me, is letting not really the big special interest groups have a voice in politics, but letting everybody else have a voice.
One thing I would add to this conversation, I'm not sure it's really answering the question, but I'll just go for it anyway, is that what I appreciate about the Equality State Policy Center is that it gets really interesting groups in the state that could potentially be quite siloed from each other. And we get together enough to talk with each other, to learn about each other's issues, that I have found, as someone that's worked in conservation, that has really broadened my perspective and scope about the kinds of things that we need to think about. If you care about the environment, you also have to make sure that you're looking at the other side, which is the impact to people's communities and workers as well. And I feel that this organization helps all the member groups not only be more effective, but really, I think, approach their work in a much more holistic way that represents Wyoming. Are there some other questions that panelists have that they would like to pose to each other, or I can jump right into some questions directly for any of you?
Can I ask lawmakers, what was a testimony that was, or not lawmakers, excuse me, panelists, my bad. What was a testimony that was like really impactful for y'all? Because I know I've heard of one or two out there, and I'm just curious if there's any that were big for you, because maybe people hearing that might motivate them to be the next one. You know what I'm saying?
So I was waiting, but there was a young woman, again, in Senate Labor. Evidently, that's where my world was this session. But Senate Labor, a young woman zoomed in from Gillette, I believe, and she identified herself as an Indigenous woman. She had a master's degree, but she had become unemployed. And then COVID and the isolation, by her own testimony, really took her down emotionally. And she was really impactful in the way that she was so honest about herself and so honest about the situation that she found herself in, along with many others. And so I really felt like that was a great testimony. I don't remember that the senators who were against the bill questioning her too hard. They did a lot of that with other people who testified, but I just thought that she was very impactful. And I appreciate that question, Antonio. And I hope you'll answer it as well.
Thanks, Jan. Someone else want to take a shot at that?
I can jump in, and I'd like to hear Antonio's answer too. I think it's always been, especially with the bills that we follow and want to pass, having that person, a regular Wyoming person, not a lobbyist, not the sister of a lawmaker or whoever it is, speak to how this bill would help their lives be different. And there are ways, and we've had lawmakers be very careful with particularly victims of the crimes we work on, to have it anonymous, to have it not, especially this session, not be on Zoom, just be on the phone. No one needs to know your name, because these crimes are really awful. And you don't need the other, 1,500 people in your small community to know all that happened. So the biggest testimony that happened was in a voyeurism bill, and you had a woman in a very small community, coworker, had one of those little tiny cameras underneath the probably the commode in the employee bathroom, filming people, and over 100,000 images were caught. Now he first said, "Hey, no, first time ever putting that little camera there," but once they checked the whatever they call it, that had all the images, 100,000 pictures. But there was another woman who a prosecutor could never charge anyone, even a low-level misdemeanor, because the voyeurism statute just didn't cover someone shoving a camera under your skirt, complete stranger, but because you had undergarments on, they couldn't charge it. And there's a big continuum of what can happen to you with violence. But someone invading your privacy like that is just as traumatic. So those two women really stole the show, and we didn't have to do much else, which is lovely. Lobbyists can go do the policy wonk stuff behind the scenes, but people talking about the real impact, there's no replacement for that.
Speaking from a past life, when I was in committee meetings as a legislator, when I saw John Q or Jane Q Public come and testify, and because I know we legislators usually know what the lobbyist's point of view is, and when you have a private citizen come and talk, and this is not this last session, but one was in ag committee years ago, but you have to be licensed to put in a water well. Well, this lady came in with a picture of her son who was electrocuted. And that kind of testimony from a private citizen always got me on the edge of my seat, because it makes a world of difference, because you know what the other people are going to say. You know what the bureaucrats are going to say. You know what the lobbyists are going to say. So a citizen lobbyist always is great testimony.
Okay, Antonio, I'm going to call on you. We all want to hear your example.
Yeah, the one that was really big for me was when the death penalty was in it was in the Revenue Committee, and there's a woman who testified who had two family members who had been murdered, and separate incidents, I believe it was a few years apart, but her testimony of just having to go through all that trauma of court cases and keeping the wounds open, and how it was just so difficult for her and her family. And I mean, she ended with saying that I wouldn't want to put anyone to death by my hands and put them through the judicial system and cause a chain reaction of trauma, and like to me, that was so powerful for somebody that had been through something like that to be able to say, no, the death penalty is wrong, and we still need to get rid of it. I mean, that was huge right there, and that was the one that I guess meant the most to me. I will add, a colleague of mine did testify one time, and I love when she testifies because she brings receipts, and it's awesome to see somebody testify and have the info they need to back it up and make sure that, because sometimes people say stuff that ain't necessarily all the way true, and when you got receipts, they can't throw that out there. So those are my two right there, I guess.
Yeah, I'm going to add my story because this is really stories about Wyoming people showing up, participating at just the core of what democracy is about. And I didn't even see this example, but I heard about it from so many people. I just happened to be away that day, but there was a committee hearing again on the rooftop solar bill. And what people described to me, and we had a very broad coalition, very diverse, we thought, of people showing up. And one thing that I found frustrating, however, was that at least our group, and I don't think any groups here, we don't dictate to the public what to say. We always tell them, speak from your heart, speak from your experience. But I've had a lot of legislators that say, well, could you get your people to do X, Y, or Z, or could you have your people just, have a few voices? And I've always said, we don't control these people. In fact, I don't even know who they are. And this absolutely happened in a committee hearing for rooftop solar, where I understand a bunch of cowboys drove down from Campbell County and showed up in person at the committee meeting wearing their cowboy hats and everything else. And we're there to support rooftop solar because it helps them save money. And it's just about self-reliance. And it's just about something that makes sense. And they were incredibly effective, and it goes far to break down the kind of boxes and labels that sometimes in Wyoming we try to put ourselves in. And we've got to constantly reach outside those stereotypes and those boxes and talk to people at where their core is. And I'm always, always impressed and inspired by the people that show up. So I'm going to move on. This is my burning question for everyone. I don't think it's on the list that I was formally given, but I'm going to go for it anyway. I'd like to hear from the lobbyists here. Many of you are very seasoned. One of you is even a former legislator. How would you summarize or compare this session to other sessions that you have worked in the Wyoming legislature? Was this one different? We all know it was different in terms of COVID and the changes there, and feel free to address those, but I'd just love to hear your take on any other differences.
I'll go first. I from the first year I took my oath of office, I have seen it getting more and more divisive. It's getting bad. People attacking each other physically and verbally. That's not good. You need to do what's right for the state of Wyoming, period. No matter, and people having to pledge allegiance to one party or another, that's not necessarily what's good. It's not good for Wyoming, period. You should do what your constituents and what you feel is right for Wyoming. A couple positives I saw, you've already mentioned, was the video of the committee hearings. That needs to stay. And because it really helps a lobbyist too, and the citizens, to go back and find the exact moment that that person said whatever they said. And that needs to stay. And the floor, the cameras on the floor of the House and the Senate, fantastic. You can put a face to the voice rather than having to go through a whole video or recording of what was said that day. You can scroll through real fast and find out when that senator or representative stood up and spoke, and then you can, jot it down. But I see no one there wants to raise taxes at all, but we have to do something. The Legislative Stabilization Reserve account's going to be gone someday, and maybe then we'll get serious. Maybe then we'll expand Medicaid. But I see it getting divisive and mean-spirited, and that's not a good thing for Wyoming.
Thanks, Dan. Those are really thoughtful comments. Anybody else want to take a shot at that? Jan, did I see you unmute?
I was thinking about it. I don't think I can say it better than Stan said it. I think I've been doing this for a long time. I think the lack of decorum, there are just traditions that we just shouldn't leave behind. And I feel like every year we get closer to this idea that it's just time to be rough and rowdy, and I don't think there's a place for that on the floors of the House and Senate. So that would be what I would like to go back to.
I can jump in real quick. I think this is maybe my 5th full year of being a lobbyist here. This is the first year I heard elected people actually poke some fun at people who are victims of crime. And I hadn't heard that in previous years, and not necessarily poking fun at the committees that hear some of the testimony about these crimes, but just sort of saying it's, I don't know, just a bigger lack of empathy than I've seen before, and being willing to say it out loud on the floor, that these traumas aren't something we can fix. The other thing I kind of noticed was, especially with lobbyists, there's a lot of expertise in Wyoming, and we're more than willing to share it and help so that we shape good Wyoming law going forward. And this year I saw a lot more just hands up. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear what experts think or say, whether it was Medicaid expansion or some of the things we've been working on. And Antonio mentioned it. There were some flat out lies happening, and that was embarrassing, I think. And I don't know how to address those, but I think it's some things for future conversation.
Some strong points to raise, but we have to hear them. Antonio, did you want to add to this?
I am not a lobbyist, but I will say I've kind of seen that trend of the mean people kind of feeling more empowered to be meaner, I guess, hate rising, I even heard like in a committee hearing just close to the end how a lawmaker brought up some anti-trans legislation that could be coming out next session. So I mean, like, it's just, there's always communities who are under attack. There's always people who are going to be saying hateful things and trying to twist it as facts or as something else. We're not about that. We're not about hating an individual. We're not about targeting an individual, but that's exactly what they're doing, and people need to pay attention, you know what I mean? Because it's going to be hard to come back.
Steph, during past sessions, during the gay marriage debates and stuff, I often thought the equality state should often have an asterisk behind it, except for these certain types of people or crimes or stuff. So are we truly the equality state? Just because women got the vote first in Wyoming doesn't make us the equality state. We fall short, way short.
Mhm.
Thank you.
we're not the equality state. I'm sorry to jump in, but we don't deserve that title right now. There's a lot of work that we need to do before we deserve it.
You're exactly right, sir. Thank you.
And I want to jump in because I coined sometime late in the session, oh, we've got a new tagline, the contradictory state. Let's start calling ourselves that, and two completely different sides of things, and they think it's okay.
Thank you. Thanks. I'm sure we could talk about this a lot. And I know we all have personal experiences of these things as well, or our members or individuals from the public that have had encountered this. I think I want to shift this to maybe a look at the future a bit to help our audience. We have two things coming up. We have the usual interim session. For those of you watching, if you're not aware, it's when the legislature goes on the road. And I'm looking forward to that with COVID restrictions diminishing, that we can have that greater interaction with legislators as they go around the state and hold committee meetings about topics that they study. So that's the interim study. And then we also have a special session coming up, of which I don't think we know a whole lot about, except to kind of figure out how to spend a lot of money. So I wonder if any of our panelists want to highlight something that they either know or want to bring up about the interim, or what they've heard about the special session coming up.
I haven't heard anything, Steph, sorry. And I do know tomorrow is management council meeting where they will go through all the interim topics. So that could be of interest if people want to watch that, but I haven't heard anything about special session.
I'll jump in quickly. I know that Judiciary Committee, most likely, if it's approved tomorrow with Management Council, really peel back and look at juvenile justice in our state. And it sounds like there's some really good agencies and folks lined up to really look at that. And then hopefully they also approve to look at Representative Sweeney's bias crimes bill that came along, and open that up to, do we need it? Do we already have it? What happened to it? What we had? So I'm looking forward to those things.
Sounds great. Jan or Antonio?
We've touched on it a little bit tonight. My concern, and I don't want to take us to the negative too far, is that we'll lose some of these remote opportunities that we have. I know legislators are probably excited to get out on the road, but it would be great if we could continue to have the kind of support that we've had. I remember a couple of years ago before COVID, there were like 2 committees that people had to be in, and we would ask LSO if they would, make sure that they both were recorded. And they said, oh, we just don't have enough camera equipment or something like that. So I'm hoping that we can keep the genie out of the bottle, so to speak. The other thing that I would say, and it sort of links to this, is that as of earlier this afternoon, I haven't looked again now, there was no video link for Management Council tomorrow. So, and then I would also say, and I said I didn't want to be negative, this really sounds negative. If they're going to talk about it, a special session, it looks to me like they're going to talk about it in executive committee out of the sight of any of us. So I have concerns there, and I really do think, again, that there's a place for grassroots to try to keep this whole process as open as possible.
Yeah, I want to agree with that, because having all this new stuff makes it far more accessible to everyday people who don't have time to take off from work, or are stuck homeschooling their kids now and they can't do it. I think making the legislature more accessible is a good thing, and we should definitely do more. Maybe something like a dictionary, so that when people see didn't pass committee of the cow, they know what that means, because no one knows what the heck cow means. You know what I mean? So if they need to do better. They need to do more to make it accessible. So that way everyday folks get on there and they can understand what is happening and how they can involve, where they can get into it.
Okay, Antonio, you've got to describe for our audience, and what does that stand for?
Committee of the whole.
That's right. Which is actually just the first reading on the floor of the floor debate. Yes.
First time I heard that, I was scratching my head like, cow, what?
I'm going to take this opportunity to highlight an interim topic, which we're not happy to see coming up. It's in joint agriculture committees, and it's it's probably the 8th year of looking at transferring federal lands to the state. We have provided ourselves, Management Council, all the evidence of how this has been studied and studied and studied and legislated in many efforts, and the Wyoming public very much opposes it. So we hope just that history and those facts and reality will prevail in that, but that's an important decision coming up. And just because we know what the outcome will be, and we just want to make sure that we're spending our time appropriately on things that are really going to move our state forward. And there's some better ways to get at the concerns there. Okay, I'm looking at the time. Here's just a quick question I'm going to throw out to people because it's on the list that was given to me. Wyoming lawmakers have prided themselves on being independent and making decisions that are Wyoming specific. Do you feel that is still the case? How may that have changed? Glad to hear anybody's quick thoughts on that.
Yeah, thanks, Steph. I'm not sure how we're so independent when we rely on federal money that none of our federal delegation even voted for, but yet the legislature's lined up to take all that money to help solve the school problems for a little bit, to help with COVID relief. But how are we independent if wow, don't get me started. What services are we just going to totally eliminate if we don't talk about revenue? Coal is not coming back the way it used to be. It is not. It is not. And oil and gas, electric vehicles are coming online. Every automaker is coming out with more and more electric vehicles. I'm not getting rid of my diesel truck but anyways, how are we really that independent? We rely on the federal government for so much money. We're one of maybe the highest state to get federal money. So we need to figure this out. So yeah, that's my 2 cents worth.
I'll just add real quickly, I think they can pride themselves on being independent and Wyoming specific, but it's a very traditional view of what Wyoming has been in the past. And if we're to go forward as humanity into the future, let's listen to the people right in front of us who live in Wyoming and are suffering under some of the consequences of the traditions of Wyoming. And that's all I'll say.
Okay, I have the not enviable job of having to wrap this up because we're at 6 o'clock. So I want to thank all of our tremendous panelists. This has been a great conversation. I want to spend hours more with you all, and I love you all. I want to thank everybody online for joining the People's Review Live. And I need to let you know that the Equality State Policy Center is a 501c3 nonpartisan nonprofit organization, and we love to get charitable gifts. And you can find us online to make donations. And if you'd like to sponsor this series, please let us know. And please sign up for our action alerts. They're free. You just get great timely news. You don't have to pay anything. And Next month, our May People's Review Live, we're going to be talking about just transition, which relates to so many of the topics we've raised today. So I hope you'll join us next month for that topic. And thank you again, panelists and members of the public, for joining us. And have a good night.